Hi, my name's Cassandra Kircher. I go by Cassie, and I wish I were at the writing festival this year. But because I'm not, I'm sending along a little reading and production. And the excerpt I will be reading is from an essay called A Portrait of My Father in Three Places. It's in my book, Far Flung, which has maybe one of the longest subtitles ever. Improvisations on national parks, driving to Russia, not marrying a ranger, the language of heartbreak, and other natural disasters. A Portrait of My Father in Three Places, from the section entitled Colorado, 1982. I'm 27 when my father drives alone across Nebraska to visit me in Rocky Mountain National Park, because he's retired now and my mother is not, and neither of my brothers lives at home. My father bought brand new hiking clothes for the trip, shorts with pockets, big boots, a lightweight button-down shirt that looks stiff. For the past 6 years, I have worked in the park as a ranger, and my father has coordinated this visit with my tour of duty at the Lawn Lake Patrol Cabin, 5.2 miles into the backcountry. He has packed in his fly rod, and on the way up the trail, I see him eyeing Roaring River for trout. Later, at just the right spot in the clearing, I turn him around so he can see Long's Peak, the park's only 14,000-foot mountain, framed like a faraway surprise by the aspen. But he doesn't seem interested in dry landscape. When we arrive at the cabin, my father watches me unbolt the 3 windows and unlock the padlock on the heavy doors as if he can't believe his daughter can do these kinds of things. I don't get the feeling that he thinks me incompetent as much as I sense that these workaday duties aren't part of his master plan for how a daughter of his should turn out. Once we're inside, there are other chores: unpacking the food, airing the bedding, building the fire. My father agrees to get water from the lake, but when I hand him the 10-gallon collapsible plastic jug, I find myself worrying that even the empty receptacle will be too heavy for him. During dinner, my Park Service radio is on, but it airs mostly static, the way it always does when I'm in this drainage. It makes the discomfort I feel with him audible. See any trout at the lake? I say, wondering what other daughters would mention to their sullen father in a 12 by 12-foot backcountry cabin. Not really, he says, and I push another log into the stove. Early the next morning, my father carries his fishing gear out the door slowly, as if his heart hurts, and I go down to the lake with him. The water is slick and clear, not like a mirror as much as a window. I can't see through to the bottom. In spite of his interest in trout fishing, my father is a Northwoods lake man, and he doesn't seem to admire this high-altitude water. Instead, he works at tying on a fly, some kind of streamer, probably one he's been deciding on since we arrived. I love the cork handle of his fishing pole, the way my father's hand wraps around it as he begins to fish, stopping and starting at first, like an engine trying to get going, and then really beginning to cast, the pole an extension of his long arm as he stretches an arc over the water. For the longest time, I stand there feeling the rhythm of the casting, remembering how I used to mimic him with my own pole, back and forth, admiring the grace of his movements, the concentration in every muscle. What I think about most as I leave him for the short patrol of the 4 Lawn Lake campsites is my father's intention: to manipulate a fly so that it moves in a way that looks like an insect and not like the simulation that it is. When I return, he has caught one cutthroat, which he's placed in the dark green backpacking creel he's brought along on this trip. I can't tell whether he's pleased with his catch. Back when we camped as a family and my father caught all the fish allowed in a single day of fishing, he would clean them and put them on ice in our cooler. I only saw him perform the cleaning ritual once, Saw him make a short, sharp cut across the fish's throat with his knife before slicing its underbelly in one long line from tail to jaw. This was when I felt sick, when I saw my father, without a second thought, hold a fish by its mouth with one hand and pull its insides out with his other so that they were visible for anyone to see. "This is the bloodline," my father said, as he put his hand in the fish's belly again and scraped away a brown and red streak. "All of it comes out." He always left the head on. As far as I know, my father never beheaded a trout. Maybe out of respect, maybe because acknowledging a meal's origins seemed most honest to him. Although I never saw my father clean a fish again, I usually watched him prepare them, watched him roll the fish in flour, salt and pepper them on both sides, and put them in the metal lid of the huge family mess kit that served as our frying pan in the wild. When I was a kid, I didn't eat trout, but I liked smelling them cook, and I liked their brown gold color against the silver of the pan. My father sautéed them in butter, and even though they looked like works of art when he finished, I don't think my mother liked making them part of her meal. Now, as an adult, I eat trout. Not that I fish for them or buy them to prepare myself. Not that I forget about how svelte and flashing they look in the wild. But each summer when my parents visit me in Estes Park, we eat at the Sundeck restaurant, and my mother orders French toast for breakfast, while my father and I order Rocky Mountain trout, served stiff and whole across our plates. When my father catches his cutthroat at the Long Lake cabin, I expect him to clean it like he used to when I was a child, and I am surprised when instead he goes into the cabin and comes out with the biggest cooking pot he can find before taking it down to the lake and filling it. After that, he transfers the trout from his creel to the silver pot. It barely has room to swim, and carries it up to the cement stoop of the cabin, where he leaves it all afternoon. At dusk, I watch my father bring his trout inside with us for the night, like a pet, and I wonder what he plans to feed it. On our second day out, I'm scheduled to patrol up to Roe Glacier, and my father decides to stay behind at the lake and fish. Because it's a strenuous hike, I don't try hard to persuade him to come along, but I regret that he'll miss being in a place where the view extends out beyond the tundra to the clouds. As my father prepares his line, tying on a new fly on a new leader, I adjust my day pack before putting my radio in its holster and starting off. It's a day of sun and cloudless sky. Little pink and purple pincushions glow close to the ground at this altitude, and with every step I feel the tension for the cabin dissolve. When I reach Mummy Pass, I look down and see my father at the east edge of the lake, his arm casting back and forth as if he is waving to me, except the wave is strange and weak, and as I keep hiking, I feel my heart tighten. On my way back down several hours later, I patrol through the 4 campsites, but no tents have been pitched, and I have the sense that my father and I are the only people in this landscape. Back at the cabin, I find him sitting on the cement stoop. The air around him smells like pine. Beside him is a cook pot, and when I look down into it, there is not one, but 2 trout, corralled together, side by side, and treading water, each eyeing the other from the side of its head. "Dinner?" I asked, gesturing towards the pot, wondering if my father has been waiting all along to catch 2 trout before he cleaned one. "I can't kill them," he finally says. And for a moment I feel a flash of fear, that kind of fear I've felt all my life whenever my father seems vulnerable. Instead of responding, I unzip a side pocket of my pack, get out my water bottle, offer my father a drink, and take a long one myself, thinking it would be easier to be back up at the glacier, eating my dinner alone on a flat rock. "What are you going to do with the fish?" I ask, wondering if he wants me to clean them, wondering if he wants to release them, wondering if they are perhaps even too small to keep. My father says nothing. "I thought you liked trout," I say. Instead of responding, he picks up the pot and brings it inside. I watch my father light the Coleman lantern in the Coleman stove, just like he used to light an identical-looking lantern and stove when I was a kid. We have spaghetti and tomato sauce for dinner, and I notice that, in spite of his fishing luck, my father has little energy. For the rest of the evening, he reminds me of a statue, his face chiseled with lines, his brown eyes less bright than ever before. When I wake on the third day, my father is sitting in a chair by the wood box, looking all wrong without a newspaper on his lap. There's rain. I can hear it and smell it, and my father is watching it out the window, thinking about something far away from this cabin. It's hard for me to see him, wherever he's at in the past. I'd rather have him here in the present, talking with the charm and humor he's capable of, or fishing down at the lake, holding the extra loop of line with his left hand, hearing the click, click, click as he slowly winds his reel, trolling his fly on the top of the water. "Are you okay, Dad?" I ask. He hasn't shaved since we've been here, and he looks changed. My father doesn't even try to tell me how he feels. Instead, he asks me what is on my agenda for the day, and I think about all I should be doing to post a sign directing backpackers to their campsites way down at Upper Tilston Meadows, the deep hole I should be digging, the tree I should be felling, the soil I should be tamping down so that the park's message to campers stays up straight and strong. With this rain, it's hard to say, I answer, thinking I should probably stay put in the cabin and sharpen the axes or shovels instead of trying to keep up with the outdoor chores. And there's always the food in the cabinet to sort through. On the floor, my father arranges pieces of bark with his foot as if he's playing a game, creating a whole world that is more real to him than the one he is in. I have no idea whether he is acting this way because he's unhappy with the way I'm living my life or because he's unhappy with the way he's lived his. I have no idea whether he feels the shift in our relationship or whether all of his sadness is a sign of something larger. As I look over at him, I realize I don't know what it feels like to be older and feebler than you'd like to be. What I do know is that I miss him, his way of knowing and seeing the world, his way of making me feel safe, like when I was a kid. And I know I'm aware of the arc of a life that is his. But I don't mention any of what I'm struggling with. Instead, I open the faded Ranger book, sit down at the table, and begin catching up on the daily entries I'm required to log as one of my duties. Later, when the rain lets up a little, my father goes out on the stoop carrying his aluminum fly box, and I wonder about the 2 trout in the bucket in the corner, a scene I'd come to think of as still life with fish. I wonder about all the sun they're not getting in this cave-like cabin, and about all the air filled with smoke and carbon dioxide from the old wood-burning stove. Finally, I have the nerve to walk over to the corner and look down into the metal cookpot. At first, I can only see blackness and shadow swirling like a kaleidoscope. And then I begin to make out the 2 trout suspended in water. When I see them and understand what they are, I know in a moment that they are dying. Their backs have the white film of death on them, and they are tilting sideways, their bodies caving in to the pull they are feeling. So that's the third and last section of the essay, A Portrait of My Father in 3 places. I worked for Rocky Mountain National Park for 7 years, and the last 3 of those years I was a backcountry ranger, as was noted in this essay. Last summer, I had a chance to go back for the first time since I worked there with my hiking group of 6 women, and they agreed, the 5 of them, it's 6 including me, to go up to this area of the park where I was stationed. There's actually 2 cabins that I was stationed in, and the Lawn Lake area was where one of those cabins were. Instead of going up the regular way, I persuaded my hiking group to go up a different way. It's up the Cow Creek drainage. And this sign was especially interesting to me because I'm pretty sure it's one that I made. So one of my duties as a ranger was to route these signs. And the reason I know this probably is mine is I always went a little bit deeper than you were supposed to because I thought it was aesthetically more interesting. And I noticed that as we were passing these signs to go up this drainage, that they had my trademark depth, the numbers and the letters in these. So the Cow Creek Trailhead is not very dramatic. It has meadows, as you can see here. 2 of my hiking partners are in the picture in the distance. And the right-hand corner where you see a ranger hat on the rock, that is a monument or memorial, which it probably looks like. That hat is in bronze or some kind of metal. It's not a hat you can put on your head. And there's a plaque, there are some roses by it, and you can see part of the sort of informational plaque to the left. And there's only been one ranger who has died while on duty at Rocky Mountain National Park, and it happened to be in the area that I patrolled. And it was 20 years after I lived there, but I was quite struck and moved by this ranger's disappearance. It took a couple days to find him. And I speak about him in another of the essays in my book. His name was Jeff Christensen, and he seemed like a very loved ranger and one that really loved this district. We hiked in, my hiking group and I, and the first night stayed at Rabbit Ears campsite, and you can sort of see how it got its name. One thing I loved about Rocky Mountain National Park is the mountains are granite, a lot of them, and there's so many rock formations that have interesting names, and this is one of them. The Rabbit Ears campsite is one that I helped build, so I was especially interested in it. I did not find the exact location, but I helped to dig the short drop privy, which you'll see, that's the silver thing with the white lid over to the right. So we always found some place that we thought campers would really like in the backcountry, and that they would actually use this short drop privy because it was better for the environment, especially if there was water around. And I also felled that bridge. That was another job. That's me standing on this bridge last summer when I was there. And I didn't do this alone. I had someone else. I think it takes 2 people to do that. But I love the fact that the same bridge is there that I had made all those years ago. So there we are at the campsite and getting ready for the night. We only stayed up there one evening and then kept going up the trail. So our destination was Lawn Lake, and that's where we wanted to camp. And here we're coming up on the lake. This is, it was shocking to me. It might not be shocking to you, but the small animal was not shocking. That small animal is a marmot, and marmots are very common at high altitudes in Rocky Mountain National Park, and they make this whistle sound. And they're always sort of chubby, and they waddle, and they are not shy at all. They, in fact, they like to try to get your food if they can. So I was expecting to see a marmot. I was not, however, expecting to see the moose that are in the smaller picture. And those moose are very common now on the west side of the park, on the east side of the park, which I was on. But when I was working there were only a couple in the park, and they were all on the west side of the park at very low elevations. So these moose probably somehow they crossed the Continental Divide, which goes right through Rocky Mountain National Park, and they're headed to high altitude. We're at 10,000 feet, over 10,000 feet here. And as you might guess, this is because the planet has warmed up, and moose like the colder temperatures, and they were not getting them where they were before. So I've done a little bit of research, and I know that their population has increased. And this is the same picture that you saw when I was reading. This is Long Lake. It's it's a beautiful lake, surrounded by this grass. It also, if you sort of imagine there's a rim around that lake, you can sort of see that the rocks don't go right up to it. The lake used to be much larger, and that's because it was dammed with an earthen dam. So sometimes I would go up and I was stationed at the cabin, and the lake would look like that, as it does in this photograph. And at other times I would go and it would be much higher. And depending on how much of the water was being released for irrigation purposes, a town down in the valley called Loveland actually owned the rights to this water. But it never looked beautiful when the water was low, because there would not be any green grass around the edge of the lake. So it's actually more beautiful in this picture. The flora around Long Lake is, these are aspen trees, which are very common in this altitude and at this place in Rocky Mountain National Park. You can see the sort of bruises at the lower parts of these young aspen, and that's probably a porcupine eating the bark. That's my guess. I didn't see them eat them, but it's common that you'll see an aspen looking like that. Sometimes it'll be a lot higher up on the tree, because when it snows, there's so much snow up there that the animal gets to a higher part of the tree. The flower is Indian paintbrush, and I've always found that to be one of my favorite Colorado mountain flowers. This is the Long Lake Patrol cabin that I spoke about in the essay, and there I am in my ranger suit, and I was trying to get the same pose when I was there last summer. And from here, we took a hike above Long Lake, and so you can sort of see the lake from a different perspective. We're heading up to Mummy Pass, which is a pass that I patrolled up to frequently. It's the one that I had to take in order to get to the glacier that I mentioned in the excerpt that I just read. There's also a lake up there. This is Crystal Lake, a beautiful lake. And on the way up there, this past summer, I saw an elk. And that, again, like the moose, was incredibly shocking to me. I'd never seen an elk at that elevation. I did take a picture of it, but it's such a tiny speck that you can't even see it in the photograph. But it was just lounging there. It was an elk, which is also called wapiti, and it looks somewhat like a deer. It's much larger and has different characteristics, especially around the neck and with the antlers. So again, that's another animal that has been sort of compelled to go up to higher elevation. Well, I was explaining the dam and how the lake's level differed depending on whether that dam was being monitored or used for irrigation purposes. And my last year at the park, that dam, which was made of earth, I called it an earthen dam, the dam broke, and it broke in the early morning hours, and I do write about that also in my book. And when it broke, there were people sleeping below in their tents, both in the back country and at a campsite in the front country. 3 people were killed from that flood, and I was just about ready. I was supposed to be walking up there that morning when I was on duty. I was in the front country, and I was supposed to be stationed to go up to the Long Lake cabin and I usually stayed there for about 5 days whenever I was stationed. But this picture, if you can imagine, this used to just be a river like it looks now, but when the lake broke, it completely gouged out the side of the bank, as you can see still in this picture, and then again in these pictures. So hiking down with my hiking group, it was just sort of incredible to see how, even though this happened in 1982, how much evidence of that flood was still there. So this is where you've just been. You've really been above tree line. So from Long Lake, if you follow the blue lines up, there's Crystal Lake. You're going up to Mummy Pass. This is in the Mummy Range. Mummy Mountain is right above the lake. And that red line is the trail. And if you follow back down, we went back down following the flood route. And that's what's 5.2 miles back to the front country. So we took a sort of a loop trail, although we had to have a car to help us get back to where our original cars were. And I want to thank you for going on this hike with me. It was fun to talk about, and I wish I could see all you there, and I would be happy to answer any questions, but I'm not sure how that's possible. So thank you very much.